Exposed creepy texts from guys in my field on social media, and now furious married men in hour one answers. I went to college for computer engineering, which, as any woman in the field could tell you, has its own particular set of challenges. Even before I launched into my career, I was already bracing myself. In college, during internships, and now in my job, I've had to stare down sexual harassment more times than I care to count. I became vigilant, learning early to stand my ground. The moment I sensed trouble, I'd snap, "Stay the fuck away from me," and I meant it. Every time I received a creepy text or instant message, whether from another student or a coworker, I took a screenshot. I saved everything in a Google Drive folder, just in case things escalated. I can't express how crucial that simple habit became. It saved me when a guy started following me around campus, and again when, at work, the harassment got so out of hand I finally decided to go to HR. Still, I hardly reported most incidents. I didn't want a reputation as that woman who's always running to management for help. So I kept it quiet, handled things myself, and documented everything. Last night, though, the dam broke. I got completely wasted with my friend, she's in a similar field, and also enduring the same exhausting shit at work, because I had a much needed day off planned. Our conversation got dark as we traded anecdotes, every news story echoing the same toxic patterns. I came home in a stormy, fuck it all state of mind. Staring at my infamous folder of screenshots, I hit my breaking point. On a whim, I uploaded the entire file to both Facebook and Instagram with a caption, "Phone and inbox of a female computer engineer." I tagged every man I could identify and whose socials I could find. Some of the highlights were jaw-dropping. Married men boldly hitting on me, my replies blunt, "Dude, you're married." Guys asking me out, then going nuclear when I declined. The relentless ones, texting over and over even after I'd clearly stated don't contact me, other than for work purposes. Explicit messages, sudden comments about my appearance, the whole cringe parade. The running theme, people who couldn't respect my wish to just be left alone. This morning, I woke up to my phone in full meltdown mode. I'd planned to use my vacation day to relax, but the drama found me fast. Every guy I'd tagged was blowing up my inbox, some angry, some desperate, all demanding or begging me to take down the posts. They scrambled to untag themselves. On Facebook, the post was gaining traction among my own circle, but my Instagram posts, 2 of them, just to fit all the screenshots, absolutely exploded. Suddenly, I had a swarm of new followers, strangers flooding my comments section, most offering support. In the midst of it all, one message stood out, an email from HR, asking me to meet with them first thing Monday morning. I replied that I'd be there, but now? I have no clue what to expect. I haven't answered any of the other messages, either from the guys involved or from curious friends. Now I'm left with decisions. Do I speak to the men who messaged me about the posts? Many are furious, especially the married ones whose wives just uncovered everything. Is silence the safest move here? Should I take the posts down, leave them up, or wait and see how things shake out with HR? Should I be worried for my own safety? I'm nervous, but I don't know if that's me overreacting. Just to clarify, not all these men were ever under my current company's control. Some were classmates, a TA from college, men from previous internships, even a guy from a past job. The reach of the men in those screenshots spanned years and workplaces, and now I've brought it all out into the light. Update 1. To recap where I left off, I'd posted an album of creepy texts I'd received over the years from men in my field, computer engineering. Some of them were old classmates, one was a TA from college, others I'd met through internships or professional development, and a few were from guys I currently work with. For so long, dealing with the sexual harassment and then the shame, and the silencing, the constant doubt from those around me, had just worn me down. But putting all those raw, unedited texts out into the open made it harder for people to ignore or brush aside what was really happening. After that post, things ramped up fast. First, a calendar invite from my company's HR department landed in my inbox. They wanted to see me Monday morning. That whole weekend, I was all nerves and adrenaline. I dove headfirst into employment law research, went through the company handbook from front to back, and for every single person I'd mentioned in my posts who also worked at my current company, I documented in detail every instance of harassment, not just from text messages, but anything that ever happened in person. On top of that, I took screenshots and made backups of the angry, even threatening messages some of those men sent me after I'd posted their texts online. It felt important to have all this detail handy, especially when it came to the 4 men from my current job who were part of my social media post. Let me break down the worst of it. One coworker had sent me these leering comments about how I looked at work, saying I must have been dressing up for him. I shut that down as bluntly as possible. He persisted, asked who else at work I'd be dressing up for if not him, said he'd know who to be jealous of. I flatly told him nobody but myself and to stop texting me on my personal phone. A few days later, he was back at it, telling me my new hair color was hot and inviting me to drinks. That was just a snippet, he'd said so much more before that. Turns out he was the one who ultimately took my post to HR, probably thinking we had some sort of no-contact agreement like the one he'd agreed to. We didn't. The only reason I'd stopped talking to him was that I never wanted to speak to him again. When I got back from a work trip, he randomly texted, inviting me to a fancy seafood restaurant, a date, basically. I replied, "Oh, you're married." He tried to brush it off, hinting that it would be our secret and I seemed like someone who could keep secrets. I told him to fuck off. The guy was fired a week later for unrelated reasons. Even though I'd been considering going to HR, I never had to, and I hadn't heard a word from him since, until I made the post. After that went live, he unleashed a barrage of threatening texts. Apparently, his wife saw the post, and he blamed me for ruining his family. He warned me that I was about to get what was coming for me real soon and to watch out. He threw in homophobic slurs, too. I'm open about being bisexual, so that wasn't surprising, but it still stung. Since that incident was outside of work, and not overtly repeated harassment, I hadn't planned to bring it up with HR unless a pattern developed. But after my post, he left me alone. It wasn't just those from my current job, either. My old college reached out about a TA who had repeatedly tried to sleep with me, and who had stopped helping me with classwork when it became clear he wouldn't get anywhere with me. Now someone else had reported him, and they wanted my statement. Then there was the married guy from an internship, who sent me angrier and more threatening texts than ever after his Instagram account got tagged in my post. I'm guessing issues blew up at home for him. After that, I took extra safety precautions, checking over my shoulder whenever I left my apartment, changing up routines, because honestly, that was one of the more overt threats. Reporting him to the police crossed my mind, and still does. Others I tagged sent texts about how I shouldn't have made private conversations public and how unfair I was being. I ignored every last one of those messages. Then Monday finally arrived, HR meeting day. I went in ready for war, armed with every possible piece of evidence, the handbooks every clause highlighted to defend that I hadn't violated any policy. There were specific rules for social media. Don't pretend to speak for the company if you aren't PR, don't share confidential code or contracts. I never mentioned my company. I was also prepped to show I'd follow the reporting procedures for sexual harassment exactly as described, reporting repeat offenders, not single incidents unless they were extreme. I'd taken the posts down Sunday as a gesture of good faith, though I doubted it would count for much. I walked in, sat down, and asked if I could record the meeting. The HR rep, let's call her Beth, said that was fine. She wanted to talk about the specific coworkers featured in my screenshots, the ones still at the company. Those were actually fewer than a third of my screenshots, but she started there. First up, coworker 1, the guy I'd previously reported and who had been moved to another team, forbidden from contacting me. Beth told me he'd brought my post to her, thinking our no contact went both ways. I politely reminded Beth that I had never agreed to that, in writing or verbally. I kept quiet about my surprise that he was the whistleblower. She asked if he'd continued to harass me after the original incident. I said no, and she moved to the next. Coworker 2, fired long ago for unrelated reasons. Beth just made sure there'd been no further issues between us when he'd still worked there. I confirmed. Then coworker 3. On Saturday, he'd sent me threatening texts, complete with several slurs aimed at my sexuality. I handed Beth a printout. She read the text silently, then stepped out for several minutes to show her manager. When she returned, we kept going. Coworker 4, no contact from him after the one time he called me a bitch for not answering. Finally, Beth asked if I had any questions. I asked what their next steps would be. She told me that had I not removed the posts, she would have asked me to do so anyway. And that's where things stand, for now. She wanted to ensure everything could be handled with discretion, but by that point, I had already removed both items in question prior to our meeting. She explained she would be meeting again with coworkers 1 and 4. Then she dropped the bombshell. Because of coworker 3's threatening comments, he had been escorted out of the building while we were speaking, fired on the spot. Apparently, he already had a record with them for another temper-related incident, and this was the final straw. She asked why I hadn't brought coworkers 2, 3, and 4 to her attention before now. I pointed to the section on harassment in the company handbook, reminding her that harassment is defined as repeated unwanted comments or actions. A single event usually isn't considered harassment unless it's something extremely serious. The conversations I'd had with those 3 men were isolated incidents, not part of an ongoing pattern, so I hadn't reported them. She gently asked if I would feel more comfortable taking a personal day for the rest of the afternoon, as she needed to speak with coworkers 1 and 4. She made it very clear that I wasn't being dismissed, wasn't being escorted out, and certainly wasn't being fired. This was purely a precaution so I wouldn't have to be around those 2 in case either wanted to confront me personally. I agreed, and so, that's where everything stands right now. Update 2. I took the rest of that Monday off like Beth suggested, went home, and tried to let my brain unclench. I made tea, put my phone on Do Not Disturb, and stood there in my kitchen staring at the kettle like it was going to give me advice. It didn't. My phone still lit up face down on the counter like a little bomb. When I finally caved, I had 2 voicemails and an email with the subject line, cease and desist. The voicemail that got my stomach in my throat wasn't screaming. It was a woman speaking quietly, like someone who hadn't slept. She used my name, said she'd found my number on LinkedIn. She told me she was married to the guy from my old internship, the same one who went nuclear in my DMs after I tagged him, and that she wasn't calling to yell. She wanted to meet somewhere public, and if I wasn't comfortable with that, she understood. I called her back. We picked a coffee shop near my place with big windows and too many strollers. She was already there when I arrived, hands around a cup she wasn't drinking, a file folder on the table. When I sat down she said, "Thank you," and then started crying so hard she had to turn her face to the wall. She had printed my screenshots and highlighted dates. She told me she'd suspected for a long time but couldn't get anything to stick. He'd been telling her she was paranoid, that she was trying to ruin his career, every cliché in the book. My post blew it up at home. He'd smashed a picture frame, left, then started texting her "you'll be sorry" nonsense. She showed me, it looked just like the texts he'd sent me, before he realized he'd been tagged. I told her I was sorry for the wreckage. She told me she wasn't. She asked if she could have my permission to use the screenshots in whatever legal mess was coming. I said yes. We sat there for a while breathing the same burnt espresso air while a toddler screamed for a blueberry muffin. I walked her to her car and watched her drive off gripping the steering wheel like a life raft. Back at home, I opened the cease and desist. It was from a law firm with a name like a mahogany paneled conference room, 3 last names I'd never heard of. They demanded I remove all references to their client, same internship guy, or they'd seek redress for defamation and interference. The letter was dramatic, all heavy words and bolded sections, like it was trying to be a Broadway villain. I forwarded it to the employment attorney my friend connected me with over the weekend. He called me an hour later. His tone was calm and boring in the most beautiful way. He walked me through why the letter was bluff-colored, truth is a defense, and screenshots aren't opinions. Well, screenshots. He told me to save everything, not to engage, and to consider making a police report about the threats just so there's a paper trail. I went down to the station before they closed and did exactly that. The officer took my statement and attached copies of the worst messages. When I walked back to my car, the sky had turned the dead gray it gets when it wants to snow but won't commit. Tuesday morning, I swiped into the office and the front desk guard actually stood up and said my name like I was on a VIP list. They'd added a second guard. Beth had sent me a message asking me to stop by before I went to my desk. When I got to her office she had a legal pad out and a second person with her, someone from legal who introduced himself and used the word intake. They wanted to copy the threatened text printout for their matter file, and they asked if I wanted building security to escort me to and from my car for a while. I said no to the escort unless something changed, but yes to walking me out that day. It felt surreal to be saying those words, like I was guessing at the right lines in a play. Beth told me coworker 1 had been put on administrative leave pending investigation. She said the phrase slowly and watched my face. She also told me coworker 4 had been given a formal written warning and was being moved to a different floor and team, no proximity to me, no shared meetings. They were scheduling mandatory anti-harassment training, not the terrible slide deck everyone clicks through while shopping online, an in-person thing with an outside facilitator. I almost laughed when she said interactive. I didn't. I got to my desk and had an email from engineering leadership about a listening session. Optional, small groups, intended to surface concerns and ideas. The invite felt corporate in the way those invites always do, but my manager stopped by with his mug and actually looked me in the eye. He said he'd support whatever I wanted to do, take time off, not travel, switch projects temporarily. He didn't say he was sorry. He said, "We should have made this easier." It landed in a strange part of my chest. Near lunch, a Slack ping from a colleague I barely talked to, soft-spoken guy on another team, brilliant, socially anxious in the way a lot of us are. He said he had something he thought I should see, and if I didn't want to be involved, he'd take it to HR himself. He attached screenshots of coworker 1 making similar comments to a junior woman during a late-night deploy, right there in the project chat. The messages were gross, but they were also damning, time-stamped, in a work channel, with other people present who said nothing. She had reacted with a shrug emoji and then stopped talking. He told me he hadn't known what to do at the time and had felt stupid and cowardly since. I forwarded it to Beth and then put my head down on my desk for a minute with all the tabs blinking behind my eyelids. In the afternoon, I did the Title IX call with the university. Their investigator was professional but had that steadiness that comes from being the person other people break down on the phone to, over and over. She asked me questions I expected. When did it start? Do you have any contemporaneous communications? And a few I didn't. Did you ever feel your academic standing was impacted? The TA from my college, who's now apparently an adjunct, has been placed on leave. There are other reports. They didn't say how many. I gave my statement, sent my files, and closed my laptop after. I sat in the quiet and thought about the younger me shaking as I walked out of his office because he joked that good grades were for girls who appreciated their TAs. On my way out that day, security walked with me to the garage. We made small talk about nothing. There was a note under my windshield wiper. Just a sticky note. It said, "Rat," no signature, the letters too careful, like someone trying to disguise their handwriting. I stood there holding the little square of paper while the guard swore under his breath. We went back inside and filed another report. They're pulling camera footage. I tried to be breezy about it, but I drove home with that word in my pocket like a rock. Wednesday, legal asked me for a quick meeting. They want me to preserve my phone as evidence for any internal proceeding, so they mirrored my texts and photos in a controlled room with a woman who has the patience of a saint and fingers like a pickpocket, quick and gentle, never nosy. She dumped the data and reminded me that if the outside letter escalated to an actual lawsuit, any deletion now would look bad. I told her my instinct to hoard receipts wasn't going anywhere. She smiled in a way that wasn't a smile. Midday, the head of engineering pinged me directly and asked if I had time for a 10-minute chat. I don't think I've ever been alone in a room with him. He's the kind of person whose calendar is a Tetris game. He sat down, closed the door, and said, "I'm not here to manage you. I'm here to listen. What do you want from us that we're not doing?" My brain shot to 100 places. Don't make women do free HR labor, pay someone to fix the culture, build clear, safe routes to report, yank managers who retaliate, make an example when you say you will. I told him some of that. I also told him I wasn't volunteering to lead a committee for free. He nodded and said, "No one should ask you to. We'll see if that sticks." Before he left, he said he understood if I declined the listening sessions and that, privately, he was reviewing manager feedback channels with HR. It felt like the kind of thing you're supposed to say. It also felt like maybe he meant it. Late afternoon, my phone lit again with an unknown number. It was coworker one's wife. I didn't know he was married. She did not sound like the first wife. She sounded like a hammer. She told me she'd seen the screenshots through a mutual friend and that if I ever contacted her husband again, she'd make sure it's the last thing I did at this company. I let her talk. When she finished, I told her I had not contacted her husband in months, that the posts were down, and that her husband was on leave because of his own behavior. Silence. Then she hung up. I sent Beth a note and a call summary in case that turned into something. It's astonishing how quickly women can be turned into each other's enemies by men who want to get out of their own messes. That evening I got a message from someone in vendor relations. The married internship guy, the one with the law letter, works at a partner company we interface with. They'd been looped in informally that he'd been named in a public post with screenshots, and their HR wanted to know if our legal department had anything they could share. I told them to route to legal and let that be that. I am not their conduit. Today, Beth told me HR finished with coworker 4. He's on a final warning. Another incident and he's gone. They also finished initial interviews on coworker 1. More people than I expected came forward. Beth didn't say how many or what they said, but her face looked like a file folder that had been sitting in a drawer too long and finally got pulled out into the light. He's staying on leave while they complete the process. There's talk of termination. I asked nothing else and went back to my desk. Somewhere in all of this, my friend who got drunk with me the night I posted stopped by my apartment with a stupidly bright bouquet and a bag of dumplings. We ate them in silence at my tiny table and then laughed so hard we cried because the only fork I had cleaned was a child's fork with dinosaurs on it. The world is ending and I'm eating soup dumplings with a triceratops. I don't know what the next week is going to look like. The university will circle back. Legal will probably keep breathing down my neck. HR will decide what to do with 1 and 4. The letter writer might escalate, or he might slink away. I've got a signed copy of my police report in my glove compartment like a passport. My locksmith is coming tomorrow to rekey my front door. This feels less like closure and more like a long hallway with a lot of doors I have to walk past, hoping none of them swing open on my face. But for the first time in a long time, it also feels like I'm not walking past them alone. Update 3. The locksmith showed up with a canvas bag that looked like it had patched bullet holes. He was cheerful in a way only people who work with broken things can be. He held my deadbolt in his hand and said, "Someone installed this backwards." I blinked at him. He tapped the strike plate with a fingernail. "See how the bevel faces the wrong direction? Makes it easier to slip." He didn't say slip with what and I didn't ask. He replaced everything with a brand I recognized from late-night Reddit threads about not dying. When he was done he set 2 keys on the counter, then a third, and told me not to hide it under the doormat like I was planning to. I tucked it into a bag of rice in the pantry and tried not to think about how fast I chose the bowl. By 10, Beth had me in a conference room that doesn't get sunlight. Security had pulled the garage footage. It wasn't grainy, it was as crisp as a reality show. My car. A figure in a hoodie, head down, a baseball cap. They walked like their knees hurt. They paused, wrote something, slid the note under my wiper. The guard froze the frame when the person glanced up to check the camera coverage. He tapped the screen and zoomed. I felt my jaw unlock on its own. Coworker 4. The same guy who called me a bitch months ago and got a final warning yesterday. He looked straight at the lens like he wanted it to know his face. The guard exhaled hard through his nose, like a horse. Beth didn't do anything dramatic. She said, "Thank you" to security and asked for the clip in their incident file, then turned to me and asked how I was doing in that voice HR must practice in front of mirrors. I said I was fine. I wasn't. She walked me back to her office and told me he was suspended immediately while they followed procedure. By the end of the day he was gone. His desk had the clean, ugly look of a place that had never been lived in. The team chat's little green dots vanished one by one when people realized what happened. Around lunch, legal pinged me to say the partner company had set the internship guy on investigatory leave and asked for anything we could share. I told them, again, to run that through our legal. I am not a hired fax machine. My attorney emailed me a letter he'd sent in response to the cease and desist, 3 paragraphs, all spine, no flair. 10 minutes later, a different attorney at the mahogany firm retracted the threat and said their client would appreciate her refraining from future public comment. The timing was too neat to be coincidence. On cue, at 2 in the morning, my phone lit up with his number. No words, just a voice note. I pressed play with the volume down. You'd think he'd apologize. Instead, a slurry little monologue about how I misread signals and we had a vibe and I had ruined something that wasn't actually hurting anybody. He said the word vibe 8 times. I forwarded it to my lawyer and the precinct email attached to my report, then blocked his number while my hands shook with a kind of cold that didn't match the temperature of my apartment. The university called Wednesday afternoon. Title IX had concluded preliminary findings. The TA who became an adjunct was no longer employed by the institution. They didn't ask me to be happy. They asked if I wanted to be notified if he appealed. I said yes. When I hung up, I remembered the exact pattern of scuff marks on his office carpet. The feeling of standing with my back to the door because I'd learned not to be cornered. I stood in my kitchen now, safe and older, and realized my shoulders were somewhere up near my ears. I ran cold water over my wrists until my skin went numb. By then the building had changed around me in small, obvious ways. A third guard at peak hours. New signs about visitor check-in that didn't look like they'd been made in word art in 2009. I joked to the receptionist that it felt like a bank. She didn't laugh. She told me to text her when I was heading down and she'd watch the feed. Later, security asked if I'd move my parking spot to level 2, right by the camera tree. I said yes. I've never liked the word safe more and trusted it less. The listening session that I meant to skip somehow got me anyway. Peer pressure or masochism, take your pick. 10 chairs in a circle in a conference room that smelled faintly like whiteboard cleaner. A facilitator who did not work for us and introduced herself with precisely zero fake cheer. I am here to hear, she said, which should have been corny and somehow wasn't. People spoke like they were stretching muscles they'd forgotten they had. One junior dev said quietly that during a 2 a.m. deploy, when the server farm was doing its best imitation of an angry beehive, coworker 1 decided to DM her that she looked cuter when she was stressed. She deleted the message and pretended it hadn't happened because she wanted the job to still be the job in the morning. A man across the circle stared into his lap and said he'd seen it in the channel and hadn't known how to react. He looked at me when he said it, then away. The head of engineering sat all the way back in his chair like he wanted to make himself smaller. He didn't talk. He just wrote things down in a narrow, precise hand. On my way out he stopped me in the hall and said, "We're contracting an outside firm to audit climate and processes. Not a one-off training. A full audit. It will not be your job." He added, almost an afterthought, that the company was rolling out a policy to explicitly bar managers from 1:1s being held in off-site bars or someone's home, and I wanted to hug whoever finally wrote into policy what women have been deciding for themselves all along. Coworker 1 went from leave to gone by Thursday morning. There wasn't a company-wide announcement, there never is, but if you've worked in tech long enough you can hear a termination sweep through Slack, like wind under a door. Accounts froze. A calendar placeholder vanished. 2 of his allies posted some vague, sourceless thing about witch hunts and then deleted it. Somebody forwarded me his goodbye email. He'd composed it on his personal account and addressed it to a cluster of friendly faces. It read like a PR memo for 1. He used the phrase cancel culture twice and my full name 0 times. He did say he was consulting an attorney. I was so tired of the word attorney I could taste it. Late that afternoon, vendor relations asked if I was free for 5. The partner company had been appreciative of our transparency and wanted to reassure us their employee would not be in any capacity touching our projects for the foreseeable future. Someone said the phrase mutual interest 3 times. Someone else said, diplomatically, that they were reviewing his employment. It sounded like a slow-motion trapdoor opening. On my way back from that meeting, Beth caught me at the elevator and asked me if I wanted the number of a company-approved therapist. I almost said no out of muscle memory, then said yes. She slid me a card with a woman's name on it who, when I called, had the kind of voice you want whispering to you if you ever have to saw your own arm off in the wilderness. We set a time for Monday morning. We didn't talk about money because HR had already told me it would be covered. Apparently the company has a budget for people who carry around rocks in their pockets. Right as I thought the day was done, security pinged me that they'd pulled more garage footage from the night before the sticky note. Coworker 4 had done a slow drive-by of the row I was parked in, circled twice, then gone up to the roof before finally coming back down and parking nose in 3 spaces away. He sat there with his lights off for 4 minutes. Then he got out and left the note. 4 minutes in your car with the lights off is long if you're avoiding a cop. It's longer if you're trying to convince yourself a woman deserves to feel like an animal that needs to be warned off. They added it to the case file. I drove home in daylight. It still felt like night. My phone blinked with an email from the adjuncts department chair. A line I've never seen in an official message before: "We are grateful to you." It made my throat feel tight and itchy. I forwarded it to my friend, the one whose couch I nearly drowned in cheap tequila on 2 weeks ago. She texted back a video of her crouched behind my couch with a dinosaur fork like it was a tiny sword. I laughed out loud for the first time all day and scared my own cat. Because no day can have an uncluttered narrative arc, I got one more call that night. Unknown number again. This time, it was coworker 1's wife. The first one. Not Hammer voice. A different one. She said she used to work in a different building of our company, years ago. That she left after a reason like yours. She didn't ask me questions. She said she hoped I had good friends and a therapist, and that she was sorry she hadn't been braver when it was her turn. I don't know what to do with that kind of time-traveled apology, so I told her thank you, and then we breathed into each other's phones for a second like we were on different mountain peaks shouting the same word. Friday morning, legal pulled me into a room with a view of the Good Coffee truck and told me, straight up, that the company was issuing a new standard. Retaliation is a terminable offense, full stop, no three-strike dance. They weren't saying it to be dramatic, they were telling me in case someone needed to hear it secondhand. They also gave me a small box. Inside was a doorbell camera. Expense it, the legal guy said, like a priest pushing bread at me. That evening I installed it badly and now it chimes like a frog because I haven't figured out how to change the setting. Every time someone drops an Amazon package it rivets. I'm leaving it. At some point in all this, a senior woman who's been at the company long enough to have a framed award that no longer exists came by my desk and asked me if I wanted to mentor a new hire who starts in 2 weeks. I said no with a gentleness I did not feel. She nodded like that was exactly the answer she hoped for. They can pay for that kind of labor, she said, and glided away. I keep waiting for a clean beat, a label I can slap on this chapter like closure or fallout. What I have instead is a series of Polaroids developing in the same shaky light, a man in a hoodie looking up at a camera he didn't think would see him, a university letterhead with a sentence that ends a job, a voicemail that sounds like a confession recorded underwater, a new policy written in dry legalese that might, if enforced, keep someone from pocketing rocks. Tonight I ate cold dumplings on my kitchen floor and watched the Frog doorbell app show me a tiny figure in a UPS uniform balancing a package like a pizza. When I finished, I opened my infamous folder, years of ugly receipts, and copied it to an external hard drive the size of a deck of cards. I labeled it with the date and slid it into the back of my desk drawer behind a stack of warranties and a postcard from a city I've never visited. On the way to bed I caught my reflection in the dark window and didn't recognize the way my face looked when it was not braced for a blow. It's not victory. It's not even peace. It's something like space, a little more of it than yesterday. I'll take it.